Hello, everybody, and welcome back to TarHeelIllustrated.com, or if you're watching on our YouTube channel, Tar Heel Illustrated. I'm THI staff writer Jacob Turner, and joining me, as he always does, our very own publisher, Andrew Jones. And Andrew, we're here for the final installment of our Top 25 UNC Basketball Players of All Time podcast series that we've been running out over the past month or so. If you haven't seen the previous videos we've done, getting down to where we are now, make sure you go check those out after this video is done. You can do that by clicking on our channel link below. But we're here to do numbers 7 through number 1. The countdown is officially about to be over. Obviously, we've been doing kind of in 6 increments, but this one's going to be 1 through 7. So adding one more to this list in terms of breaking these up, AJ. So before we dive into it, though, make sure you guys head on over to TarHeelIllustrated.com after this video is done. Check us out. Sign up for a premium subscription if you want to as well. You can do that for just $8.33 a month, and it's a great time to do it with all the recruiting stuff going on right now. I mean, we were just talking to Dina off camera, and she's been swamped with all the football offers going out, and that's not even counting basketball. So just a ton of stuff going on the Carolina football and basketball recruiting front. So head on over to our website. You can find the link in the description below. But, of course, wait till this one's over so you can find out who is number 1 on our list. But AJ, I think that's enough of the talk and chatter before. Let's go ahead and dive into this one, starting with number 7 on our list, Larry Miller, a forward that played at Carolina from 65 to 68. Going to run through his accolades as I always do, and then I'll kick it to AJ to talk a little bit more about Larry. 2-time first-team All-American, 2-time first-team All-ACC player, 2-time ACC Player of the Year, 2-time ACC Tournament MVP. He's an ACC Male Athlete of the Year in 1968, and he also won the Patterson Medal in 1968 as well. Also named to the ACC's 50th anniversary team, and his jersey is honored in the Smith Center. So, AJ, Larry Miller played in the 60s, mid-60s kind of vibe, and when you look at those accolades right there, not much better you can do. Just All-American, All-ACC, ACC Player of the Year, Tournament MVP, jerseys honored, 50th anniversary team. I mean, there's so many things and accomplishment that Larry Miller did. So like I always like to ask you, why did you choose to put Larry Miller at number 7 on this list?
Before I answer that, just a quick reminder, too, that these rankings are based solely on their careers as Tar Heels. Mm-hmm. Whatever they did the minute their UNC careers ended has no bearing on where the players are in this series. It's just about their time at Carolina. And you're reading off that stuff, and honestly, you can mix a lot of these guys up in a hat and just blindly pull out names, and that's a good list. Yeah. You could put them back in the hat, pull them out again with a very different list, and it's a good list. Mm-hmm. That's what's so fun about this. And we talk about this every week when we do these podcasts, but there is no right list, there's no wrong list. And that's what makes it so fun, because North Carolina basketball has so much ridiculous history.
It's crazy.
So doing a list like, even in football, it was fun. And there are a lot of great players that have played in North Carolina football. And we did a 25-man list, and there was debate there as well. But the debate is off the charts in basketball because people emotionally are attached to different guys throughout history. So they will use that attachment, that emotional connection they have with that player. For example, when we posted Larry Miller up on the site, and on Monday, number 7, there are people on our board saying, boy, he was my favorite player growing up. I first became a Carolina fan when he was playing. So he means something a little different to them. Mm-hmm. So they have the emotional component going in when they think about who should be ranked where. We're just strictly looking at it, the numbers, the honors, their importance to UNC basketball. And when you look at Larry Miller, Jacob, there are very few players in the history of the program that are more important than Larry Miller. Think about where Carolina basketball was when he committed. Yep. When he signed with North Carolina. He was an enormously important recruit for Dean Smith. You could argue maybe the most important recruit for Dean Smith. The program, it didn't take off overnight when Dean took over. It was I think his 3rd year was when they came back from the road trip at Wake Forest, and Dean Smith was burying an effigy. Billy Cunningham, whom we talked about last week in the podcast, runs on the team bus, pulls the Dean Smith burying an effigy down. That's a legendary story, and it's a true story. Larry Miller came after that. And when Larry Miller came, not only was he a great player like Cunningham was, but the team started to win. In 1968, they played for the national title. It was a really, really good team, but they played an incredible UCLA team and got their clocks cleaned that night, and they had to play them in LA. Not at UCLA, but at the LA Sports Arena, which wasn't too far from UCLA's campus. But that was their second straight Final Four. They went to the Final Four 67, 68, 69. There were other guys on those teams that were fantastic and that we've talked about in this series. But if you were to talk, if Dean Smith could come back right now for 10 minutes and ask him, who's the most important recruit you ever got? And Dean didn't like to name one guy over another guy, but let's say we gave him some truth serum and he went ahead and did it anyway. I wouldn't be surprised if he said Larry Miller 1A, Charlie Scott 1B, and Charlie Scott for a lot of reasons, but we'll get into him here actually in a minute because I'm advancing our next guy on the list. But Larry Miller was a spectacular player, scoring machine, a guy who could carry a team on his back in stretches when he needed to, and was just an absolute rock star of a player. Didn't seek the limelight like some other players have, and I think has been sort of forgotten over time because Charlie Scott's the more remembered player from that era for obvious reasons and justified reasons too. But Larry Miller was a phenomenal player. Just read the bio, read what we wrote about him, and there is no denying that this is the spot where he belongs.
Absolutely, yeah, Larry. It's important to consider that era too, because like you said, some people just kind of think back to Carolina basketball was always kind of at this elite level, but there was obviously a time when Dean Smith came in that it struggled for a little bit and had to kind of get there. So these are the guys similar to what we talked about in the last video with, I can't remember who it was specifically. It was probably a couple guys, but
before you go to Charlie Scott, I'm sorry, before you go to Charlie Scott, I just want to jump here real fast. I forgot to mention, because I've got all these things going in my head. I can't rattle them all out. Just for statistical standpoint, so people can get some clarity. He averaged 21.8 points a game for his career, the fifth highest scoring average in Carolina history. Averaged a double-double as a sophomore. So very, very prolific. Go read the bio. You see what the guy accomplished. If you aren't familiar with Carolina basketball much in that area, and certainly aren't familiar with Larry Miller, get familiar with him. And next time you go to the Dean Dome, look up there. Because all these guys we're talking about, their jerseys are up there in one of those rows. Some of them, a lot of them are on the first row, and those are the guys we're talking about in this podcast.
Absolutely. No, 100%.
Most of them anyway.
Yeah, no, 100%. There's so much history in this program, and kind of like what I was going to say about Miller is, those are the guys that kind of set the standard and kind of changed the course of Carolina basketball in terms of what they were able to do and the success that they brought. So that's hugely important. And you just look at the individual accolades too. And I mean, there's really no surprise that he's on this list. Now, moving on to the next guy that's on this one, who we've already talked about and kind of hinted at a little bit, Charlie Scott, a guard/forward that played at Carolina from 1967 to 1970. Now, before we go into the individual accolades, a lot of people already know about this, that, Charlie Scott is the, first African-American to play on the varsity basketball team at Carolina. Big accomplishment in terms of that and what that kind of changed in terms of race and everything going on back then, especially in the late 60s. And obviously is a big mark and kind of shows the kind of person Dean Smith was as well. So besides that, though, and the huge importance and accomplishment that was, he was a heck of a basketball player too. 2-time first-team All-American, 3-time All-ACC, NCAA Tournament East Region MVP in 1969, ACC Tournament MVP in 69, ACC Male Athlete of the Year and Patterson Medal Award winner in 1970, named to the ACC's 50th anniversary team. A Naismith Hall of Famer, was inducted just a few years ago back in 2018, and another guy whose jersey is honored at the Smith Center. Yeah, I mean, there's so much things you could say and so many different avenues we could go down. And I kind of mentioned, like I said, his importance in terms of, kind of breaking that barrier and color barrier in college athletics, specifically at the University of North Carolina. But I think some people might forget he was a heck of a basketball player too. When you look at those accomplishments, man, I mean, it doesn't get much better than that. So yeah, not only is Charlie Scott, in my opinion, one of the greatest Carolina basketball players on time, arguably the most important Carolina basketball player on time, and what he was able to do, like I mentioned with, African-Americans and all that stuff that was going on back in the late 60s, early 70s.
Well, you have to talk about that because it's part of the story. And just like when you talk about Jackie Robinson was an incredible baseball player, but the intriguing part of his story is the process.
Yeah.
For when Branch Rickey signed him, in the minor leagues, he gets called up, how his teammates handled it and so forth. and how he dealt with it. And one of the reasons that Jackie Robinson was chosen by Branch Rickey, why he decided, he's the guy that needs to do it because he can handle it. He can handle the distractions. He can handle the pressure. He can handle the abuse and the stuff that would happen on the road and from other people. And I think that that's one of the things about Charlie Scott that stands out. It's not just that he was the first one, but how he handled it. A man of dignity and grace. And really, I know this isn't about post-Carolina career. He's been one of the great ambassadors for North Carolina basketball all the years since he finished playing. Had a really nice career in the NBA. One of Dean Smith's favorite players that he ever coached. And one of the reasons is because of the grace that he handled that back in the time. It is really hard for us to understand what that must have been like. And I think it's important to try to a little bit. I think it's important that we're reminded about the way things are and how far we've come. Mm-hmm. And Charlie Scott is a shining example of the University of North Carolina for that. But man alive, if he was the 58th African-American player at Carolina, he'd still be on his list and he might still be number 6, because what I want to emphasize here in this series is that he was a great player. Mm-hmm. Let's remember he was a great player. People think of Jackie Robinson. They don't always think about the great base stealer, the great second baseman, the guy that could get hits, the guy that moved runners along, did all the things he did. Charlie Scott was an absolute gamer. He had a 20-footer at the buzzer to beat Davidson to win the NCAA East Regional one year to get Carolina to the Final Four. Against Duke in the 1969 ACC championship game, 40 points, which some people will say that's the greatest all-time single-game performance by a Tar Heel. ACC title game, 40 points against Duke. That's Mount Rushmore kind of stuff. But he did that stuff all the time. His numbers were prolific. The teams won big time. 1968, they played for the national title. They went to 3 straight Final Four. So Larry Miller, who we just talked about, was huge in getting that thing to a higher level. Charlie Scott took the baton and continued the race and moved everything forward, and clearly opened the door for other great players to come along, a couple of whom we're going to talk about here in this list. But there is no denying how great Charlie Scott was as a basketball player. And then the other stuff is just, exclamation marks and icing on the cake or whatever you want to throw in there, how you want to describe it. His importance, Larry Miller's importance to North Carolina basketball, that era. If you love Carolina basketball, you don't know a whole lot about before when you were born or a certain time, go back and learn about 67 through 69, how important that period was in Dean Smith turning North Carolina into what it has been ever since, with the exception of a few minor hiccups.
Yeah, just like you mentioned, such an important era for Carolina basketball, and what Charlie Scott was able to do definitely kind of transcends sports. And I should mention this as well, he was also the first Black athlete to be on a scholarship at North Carolina as well. So yeah, just it's bigger than sports when it comes to Charlie Scott, but man, was he a heck of a basketball player too. Moving on to number 5 on this list, Antwan Jamison, forward that played at Carolina from 95 to 98. I have to say, AJ, this guy, I obviously know who Antwan Jamison was, but he was playing at Carolina when I was crawling around like a baby, so didn't get to watch him in person. But he was the one that surprised me the most when I looked at. I was like, oh man, I didn't know he had this many accolades, and it caused me to. I had to look a little bit deeper into it and go back and kind of learn some things about Antwan, because obviously I know him from his really successful NBA career as well. But man, was he a great player at Carolina as well, and that's why he's number 5 on this list. National Player of the Year in '98, 3-time All-American, 3-time First-Team All-ACC. ACC Player of the Year in 98, Rookie of the Year in 96 in the ACC, ACC Male Athlete of the Year in 98, NCAA East Region MVP in 98, Freshman All-American in 96, and I forgot to read this one as well, ACC Tournament MVP in 1998. So 98 was a heck of a year for Antwan Jamison. Best Male College Basketball Player, SB in 98, named to the ACC's 50th anniversary team, elected to the NABC Hall of Fame in 2021, and his UNC jersey is retired. So man, like I said, I knew how good Antwan Jamison was. I knew he was one of the best players to ever play at Carolina, but I don't think I knew he was that good and accomplished that much in his time as a Tar Heel. And we're not considering NBA or his career after Carolina as well. He obviously had a very successful NBA career and played for a while, but just he's got to be in the top 5, man. I mean, that list is just almost as impressive as it gets, and there'll be a couple more impressive ones as we continue on this one, but it doesn't get much better than that when it comes to an individual's career at UNC.
You could argue he's the greatest freshman in Carolina history, although a guy later on in this list, you could also make that same argument.
Feel
but the thing that he and Tyler Hansbrough had in common is that they were both freshman big men who were heavily relied on from the day they stepped on campus, coming in after the Tar Heels lost a ton of players. In Jamison's case, that 95 team lost a ton of guys, okay? So the 95, 96 team was really, really young. You know, Carter was a freshman, Jamison was a freshman, Ademola Okulaja. They still had Calabria on that team, but they were. When you looked at them in October, you thought, how the heck's this team going to win enough games to get the NCAA tournament? And then the world was introduced to Antwan Jamison, who had the quickest second leap off the floor jump that I've ever seen. He would go up and then he'd come back down and be right back up again. And that's why he had so many put back so many of his own misses, because he had the greatest nose for the ball of a guy I've ever covered. And he got to it so quickly that dudes in the lane, you see guys look helpless on the perimeter. Someone does a crossover and they leave the defender's jock in the rafters, but you don't see guys look as helpless on putback situations inside. And Antwan routinely made guys look helpless. How about this? 19 points a game, 9.9 rebounds for his career, 57.7% field goal percentage. Think about how many of those misses he actually put back. So his scoring ratio on touches was completely off the charts. As evidence, and he didn't need the ball long to make the move. He didn't get the ball and wait for guys to clear out and dribble 40 times and make a move. He scored 35 points against Duke one night and had the ball for a total of 53 seconds. That was Antwan Jamison. I covered a game. He was in the program when I first started. December of '96 was the first Carolina basketball game I ever covered. They won it VMI in mid-December that year, okay? It was either that year or the next year. It was the next year because Serge Wicker had a big game too. No, it was that year. They played at Maryland. I think he went for 32 and 16 or something like that. And all the guys on press row were trying to count in their head and take notes of how long Jamison actually had the ball in his hands.
That's awesome.
And he scored 32 points, jumpers from 12, jumpers from 15, stuff around the rim, the spin move, the baseline, the drop step. He didn't really do drop steps too much, scoring over people, getting the ball and just getting it up real super quickly before anybody could react. And those were a really good Maryland team that night. And I just remember in awe watching him play and all the different things he could do. By the way, he was ACC Player of the Week 12 times, and I think is still tied for the record all time.
Oh, that's got to be, yeah.
Antwan Jamison was an absolutely great player. Had he stayed for his senior year, and by the way, as a sophomore and junior, they went to the Final Four. He led them to the Final Four. He was clearly the best player. Had he stayed for his senior year, he might be the guy who has all the records at UNC, not someone else we're going to talk about in a few minutes. And had he won a national title, he may have been bumped up even a little bit higher on this list. The 98 team should have won it. They were the best team in college basketball. When you go back and look at Carolina history, the teams that should have won titles, that didn't, the best teams that didn't win titles, 77, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. 98, that was one. And certainly 84, we could talk about that in a minute as well. There were these guys were on those teams, and they didn't totally get it done. Tar Heels couldn't shoot when they got to the Final Four in 1998, and that was Antwan's last game. He kissed the floor at the in San Antonio when that game ended. I guess maybe Roy was inspired after the Duke game last year. But Antwan Jamison, I love covering him. He was a guy that spoke it like it was. He was a very driven player and just an absolutely breathtaking athlete. Maybe
the most efficient player in Carolina history, arguably.
One of them. Well, I mean, I think guys like Brad Daugherty were probably more efficient. Daugherty went about it a little bit differently. Shooting percentages are what they are. But Jamison, if you think about terms of touches and time occupied with the ball, I think you could say that about him.
Up there,
he didn't have the same shooting percentage as a few other guys, but he rebounded so many of those misses that if there was a statistic where points scored per touch, and if you include rebounding your own miss as a single touch, then you might be able to make that argument.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Yeah. Big time player. That was one of arguably the biggest surprise on this list because obviously I know about him, but until you really go into the specifics of just how good he was, like, wow, that kid was incredible. Number 4 on this list, Michael Jordan. I never heard of that name before. Guard that played at Carolina from 1981 to 1984. And as a disclaimer, this is a big disclaimer because we did mention this earlier. This has nothing to do with their professional careers before people go psycho on this one that he's at number 4. Because obviously, if we're talking NBA and career, he's arguably the greatest of all time. And at least one of two. It's either him or LeBron, depending on who you ask. But Michael Jordan.
No. Wilt Chamberlain, my friend.
Yeah, Wilt Chamberlain, depending on how far you want to go.
I will have Jordan Chamberlain before I enter LeBron in that conversation. Yeah, Don't shoot the 8 mail over that. Mm-hmm. By the way, I covered 4 LeBron games in the NBA too, and
nice.
Mesmerizing player to watch.
Oh yeah, fantastic player. I can agree with you on that.
But Wilt Chamberlain, they told him he couldn't pass, so he led the league in assists that day.
Yeah, he's a guy that gets kind of overlooked because he played a little bit longer ago in that respect.
He would be the best player in the NBA today.
100%. He was about as good as it gets. But let's go into Michael Jordan's accolades at Carolina. 2-time National Player of the Year, 2-time consensus All-American, ACC Player of the Year in '84, 2-time First Team All-ACC. ACC Male Athlete of the Year in '84, All-ACC Tournament Team in '82, '83, and '84, Freshman All-American in '82, ACC Rookie of the Year in '82, ACC Athlete of the Year in 1984, NCAA All-Tournament All-Time Team, and inducted into the Naismith Hall of Fame, and obviously won a national championship as well during the '82 season. So, I mean, so many different avenues and things we could talk about Michael Jordan, from his famous shot in the national championship game at '82 to some of the famous photos of the dunks he had in his time at Carolina, to just what he was able to do and completely transcending and transforming the sport and kind of turning it into what it is today. And a guy that, it doesn't matter when you were born, the name Michael Jordan, what he did. But going into Carolina specifics, he was a great player. Is he number 1 on this list? No. And I think some people will say that because they look at him and think about what he did in the NBA. And that's why, we're really heavy on emphasizing the fact that we don't consider any of that in these rankings. But I think he's definitely a guy that has to be in the top 5 in terms of what he was able to do at Carolina and his accolades. And I mean, just one of the greatest to ever do it, man. Just, there's no doubt about it.
You mentioned the dunks, and the dunks, they still play the dunk at Maryland.
Yeah, that's the one that I was thinking of when I said that.
Mike Patrick says, look at that, because he was doing stuff then. There were a few of the guys, Joe Griffith at Louisville, Clyde Drexler at Houston on the college level, were doing things that people hadn't seen before with the basketball. The difference was that Jordan did them, and he did them more emphatically. Dominique Wilkins at Georgia, by the way. Mm-hmm. He did them more emphatically, and he had thousands of other parts to go with it. Mm-hmm. To me, the greatest dunk Jordan ever had wasn't the one at Maryland. It actually, to me, was the ultimate glimpse into what the basketball world was going to eventually see. They were trailing by 16 against Virginia when they were both ranked. They were ranked 1-2 in the nation. Virginia had Sampson, and it was at home in Carmichael Auditorium. And Jordan had Carolina tied up. Jordan had a bucket that tied up, and then he had a steal of Rick Carlisle, who went on to play in the NBA and has been a well-known coach in the NBA. Mm-hmm. He had a steal in the backcourt, just picked him, and then went in and slammed the thing home. And Carmichael was going completely bonkers. That, to me, encapsulates the Michael Jordan the rest of the world saw for years and years and years, and that was brewing, percolating in Chapel Hill. And it's moments like that where he did things that nobody else at Carolina really has ever done. And so he did some of that stuff, but ultimately you got to place guys somewhere, and the guys in front of him maybe a little bit more decorated as college players, maybe some better numbers as college players. And part of that was Jordan played with a guy named Worthy his first year, played with Perkins all 3 years. You had to share the ball. Kenny Smith was there his junior year, his last year. You had, that '84 team had like 8 guys that played in the NBA at some point. Mm-hmm. So you had to share the ball. And Jordan wasn't a selfish player. So he wasn't going to go out and he didn't have to score 28 points a night. And the thing that I used to chuckle, or if I can quote Miss Dina King, I used to get tickled at, was when people said, well, the only guy who could ever hold Michael Jordan under 20 points a game is Dean Smith, which was hogwash, because Jordan averaged 20 points a game as a sophomore, would play like 26 minutes a game.
Just a false statement.
Yeah, they used to kick the crap out of so many people that Dean's not going to play in 35 minutes in a 40-point game or a 30-point game. His points per minute were off the charts. And he just did so many other things. He averaged 17.7 points for his career, 5 rebounds. And again, he played in an era where there weren't as many shots. There wasn't as much scoring. The shot clock and the three-point shot were born full-time throughout the NCAA after Jordan, his career. And although his sophomore year, there was a three-point circle in the ACC. It was only 17 feet 9 inches. Mm-hmm. It was actually inside the top of the key a little bit. And there was some scoring that year, but overall, it just wasn't as prolific across the board in college basketball. But his greatness was what it was. He averaged 19.5 points a game as a junior, led the ACC. The flair for the dramatic, the competitive spirit, all that stuff we saw in abundance later on. It was happening in Chapel Hill, and it was happening at a highly, highly impressive level. I think if the 84 team wouldn't have stumbled the way that they did, they lost to Indiana in the Sweet 16. I think, a couple of the mistakes that Dean ever made, maybe the 4 corners in 77 against Marquette, and maybe sitting Michael as long as he did in the first half against Indiana in the Sweet 16 because he picked up a second foul. Hindsight's 20/20 vision, right? Mm-hmm. They lost by 4 points in that game to an Indiana team they should have wiped the floor with. And then Indiana lost to Virginia, who went 6-8 in the ACC in the next game in the regional final. Carolina would have played that Virginia team, the post-Ralph Virginia team in the regional final, had they gotten past Indiana. Then they get to a Final Four. They would have beaten the Houston in the Final Four, would have had a rematch with Georgetown in the title game. And if Jordan they would have done that. And I know ifs don't mean anything, but for the sake of discussion here, if they get through Indiana, I think they end up playing Georgetown. If they're able to beat Georgetown that game, win a second title, then you might see MJ at the top of this list because mm-hmm. championships matter.
Yeah.
Banners matter. Getting it done in March matters. Mm-hmm. And they did a lot of that, but you got to rank these guys somewhere. And the 3 that are ahead of them, I think, are certainly worthy of that. But the best thing about Jordan was everything that people saw in the NBA, they saw percolating in Chapel Hill, and it's pretty cool.
Yeah, it is kind of cool to go back there just because how successfully ended up being at the next level. He's one of the greatest competitors, if not the greatest competitor to ever play the sport.
Ask Roy.
Yeah.
Roy knows a competitor when he sees one. Just ask Roy. 100%. Hansbrough is up there too.
Yeah, Hansbrough. I was about to say there's a guy coming up soon that might give him a run for his money on that, but hard to argue with Jordan when it comes to the greatest of all time. So, number 3 on this list, Lenny Rosenbluth, forward that played at Carolina from 1954 to 1957. So taking it way back with this one, but undoubtedly if you're a Carolina basketball person, a Carolina basketball history guy, you know the name Lenny Rosenbluth. This is nothing new. National Player of the Year in 57, 2-time All-American in 56 and 57, ACC Player of the Year in 1957, 3-time first-team All-ACC player, NCAA Regional MVP in 57 as well, ACC Male Athlete of the Year in 57. 57 was a heck of a year for Lenny Rosenbluth. Named the ACC's 50th anniversary team, International Jewish Sports Hall of Fame inductee, and his jersey number 10 is retired by the University of North Carolina. Now, this is a guy that's just synonymous with the university. He's a guy that's been, around and you'll see him, back in the day at games a lot. He's a guy that's kind of stayed involved with the university and coming to games and watching. And he's just a guy that you know about and what those teams were able to do back during his era. Obviously, a guy that won a national championship as well. Lenny Rosenbluth is a guy that kind of before that era of what we talked about a lot on this podcast as well in the mid to late 60s when, the likes of Charlie Scott and Larry Miller played. But this was a time in Carolina basketball history that's remembered for a lot of success as well. And Lenny Rosenbluth had a big role to play in that.
Well, let's remember that he had all those accolades in 1957 and the guy named Chamberlain was playing.
Yeah,
at Kansas that year, and
what he ended up doing, right?
Yeah, everybody knew who Chamberlain was before he even got to college. He was it. And so Lenny not only beat him out in the honors, many of which were decided before the postseason, but then Carolina beat Kansas in the national championship game in 3 overtimes. They actually won the Final Four game over Michigan State in triple overtime, then the national title game in triple overtime. Let's also remember that the ACC was like the first league conference to say you got to win your tournament to get the NCAA tournament. So the do or die nature of the ACC tournament that made it such a jewel for so long, it was born way back in those days. So when you got to the ACC tournament, that was the most important game of the year, period. Now you get there, it's a cocktail party, what Roy said, right? Or allegedly said, whatever. Then you had to win it. You had to approach each game like it was your national championship. So in 3 ACC tournament games and in the 2 Final Four games in 1957, Lenny Rosenbluth averaged 31.2 points a game. Think about that. 31.2 points a game. He was the fourth highest career scorer, all-time scorer at North Carolina, over 2,000 points. The highest scoring average for a season, I believe it's or for a career rather, 26.9 points a game. Highest scoring average for a season at North Carolina, 28 points a game. It just goes on and on and on. And what puts him in this position, like in football, Lawrence Taylor was incredible his last year at Carolina. He kind of started taking form his junior year. And people thought, why is he number 7? Well, because he wasn't great all along. He didn't have multiple great years, but that one year was so fantastic. Lenny Rosenbluth was an All-American in 1956 as well. Mm-hmm. It wasn't like he just exploded on the scene in 57. He was a phenomenal player beforehand. The numbers I just told you speak for it. He was a terrific player. He was the best player, the National Player of the Year, on one of only 2 college basketball teams, major college teams, to ever go 32-0 and win a title.
Yep.
57 Carolina, 76 Indiana. So whatever you think about the eras they played in, you have to identify the 57 Tar Heels as one of the greatest college basketball teams of all time because of how they won their title, the fact that they were 32-0, and he was the man on that team, and he could do it all. He could score from a lot of different places. Prolific shooter. Sometimes he shot a whole lot in games, but he had to. That was the team. That's the way it was built. That's the way Frank McGuire wanted them to play. The Underground Railroad with the 5 starters from New York. The storylines around Lenny Rosenbluth are many. And prior to COVID, he was still going to home games at the Dean Dome, and it's always cool to see him there. And he wanders, he goes up the aisle to go get popcorn, and I don't even know.
Yeah, just like a regular guy, right? Not like a legend.
I don't know if people know who he is, and they should appreciate him.
Oh, absolutely.
Lenny Rosenbluth is still around, and in the era of selfies with famous people next year, when everybody's back and he's at games. Well, anyway, I think I'm surprised more people don't take selfies.
Yeah, I agree. I think he's
because of what he represents.
Yeah, he's a legend in terms of what he was able to do at Carolina. And you said 33.1 points per game.
31.2 in the 3 ACC tournament games and the 2 Final Four games that year.
And it's a different era of basketball too. I mean, it's just a completely different game back then too. You know what I mean? So
that was an era where there was some scoring. The slow down ball, the stall ball, the 60s hadn't arrived yet. And maybe they didn't play defense as great back then, but it doesn't matter. You can only be compared to what you did.
Exactly.
The game's going to be different in 20 years than it is now, and you shouldn't punish guys now because of how the game evolved. So Lenny Rosenbluth would have been a phenomenal player in any era. You don't post those numbers unless you're just sickly good.
Yeah, exactly. One of the greatest to ever do it in a Carolina uniform. Number 2 on this list, Phil Ford. That's a name that I'm sure everybody knows. Point guard that played at Carolina from 74 to 78. National Player of the Year in 1978. 3-time first-team All-American. ACC Player of the Year in 78. 3-time first-team All-ACC. ACC Tournament MVP in 1975, ACC Athlete of the Year in 77 and 78, Freshman All-American in 75, Patterson Medal winner in 78, inducted into the College Basketball Hall of Fame back in 2012. It was named to the ACC's 50th anniversary team, and of course, his number 12 jersey is retired by the university. AJ, I want to ask you this about Phil Ford because he's a guy obviously I know a lot about way before my time, but he's a guy that even from talking to my dad, who's a big Carolina fan, even from talking to people that, got to see him play back in the 70s, and a lot of people say they were their favorite Carolina player of all time. I want to ask you this because I'm genuinely curious and would like to hear your opinion on it. What about Phil Ford, not just in terms of what he did on the court, I guess what made him so good and what made him such a fan favorite for people who to this day still say that, Phil Ford's my favorite Carolina basketball player of all time. What 50 years later, basically? I mean, just one of the greatest to ever do it. But what made him so good?
Well, we're not doing a 5-hour Phil Ford podcast here.
Yeah,
but okay, I'll just throw a bunch of different things out that I've heard. And I remember vaguely, when I was watching basketball back then, and remember I watched it when I was like 3 and 4. Dad made me watch it, and it's probably why I do this for a living now. Exactly. But maybe the greatest smile in Carolina history. Think about when he won the Everett Case Award as a freshman. See, freshmen weren't allowed to play for a long time, but when he came in, they were suddenly allowed to play, and he had an impact.
Mhm.
And it elevated attention on recruiting a little bit more because guys could come in and help right away. His performance in the ACC tournament that year was off the charts. Smile,
Mhm.
the net around him, all that kind of stuff. Those are Phil Ford memories. I think one of the photos we used this week was one with a net around him.
Mhm.
But I think that maybe this is a stretch, but of all the guys that played for Dean Smith, maybe he was the perfect Dean Smith player.
Mhm.
He may have been more connected to Dean Smith than any player he ever had. The rules of the game were changed because Phil Ford was so good at running the full corners.
Yeah.
They changed the sport because he was so good at doing that.
Literally.
But even without the four corners, he was a great player. I mean, he was the all-time leading scorer at Carolina until Hansbrough broke the record. Almost 2,300 points, okay? He had 112 games scoring in double figures. He averaged 6.1 assists, 18.6 points, 6.1 assists for his career. And he played with a ton of studs.
Mm-hmm.
So there were a lot of shots to go around. Walter Davis was there at the time. Mitch Kupchak was there at the time. Tommy Lagarde was there. I mean, there's just the list of NBA players is off the charts. And here he is racking up numbers and running the show.
Mm-hmm.
He did it all. Ran the show, was the perfect extension to Dean on the court, was a coach on the court in many respects, was not a selfish player. His pull-up jump shot on the break was something new that a lot of people hadn't seen done in the way he did it. It was a thing of beauty. You can find it on video now, maybe a little bit grainy, but appreciate what you're looking at. He could get to the rack. I think one of the photos we also used this week with Phil Ford was a layup. Legs kind of kicked in the air because he broke down a defender, split the defense, got right to the rim. Not just in the half court, he would get to the rim in the full court as well. Filled the lanes, got guys the ball. Was an absolute winner. He was with a two-time ACC Athlete of the Year, Male Athlete of the Year, something like that.
Yeah,
he was loved, revered by everybody. He was an unbelievable guy. Is an unbelievable guy. When I had a chance to finally meet him, it was one of my thrills. You try not to get overly thrilled in this business. You try to get a little desensitized so you can properly cover the subject that you deal with. But I got to admit, when I was in Wilmington, had a radio show, he agreed to come on. And it was such a fun conversation that we went to a break. And I asked him during the break, would you mind staying for a second segment? It's a radio show in Wilmington. I mean, I had like 3,000 people listening or something like that. He agreed to stay on. I had him on for like 42 minutes that night. I still have the audio of that. It was a great, great thrill of mine. It was a great thrill of other people's. There's something about NC State has David Thompson. I've told you the stories about my interaction with David Thompson and sitting next to him in a couple of NC State games when I covered them as well. And a very prominent NC State booster one time told me, David Thompson's job is to be David Thompson.
Yeah, literally.
Okay. Well, Phil Ford, maybe not so much like that because Phil has been involved with coaching. He's been involved with the Rams Club and everything else. But in the end, when I see Phil Ford walking along the court before a game, and you've seen it before too, Jacob, when we go out and shoot stuff during warm-ups and that kind of thing, and there's scattered fans filling the building, you're going to hear somebody yell his name.
Mm.
And it's a thrill for them because Phil Ford just walked by. Yep. And he hadn't played a game for North Carolina in 43 years.
Just one of the greatest, man. It's just a guy that he's just so synonymous with Carolina basketball. And, somebody that, like I've said, a lot of people that I know that are older have just said he's my favorite player in Carolina history.
He's from Rocky Mount. And Gerard Hardy, who's on our staff, is from Rocky Mount.
Dan's from Rocky Mount as well, yeah.
Gerard went with me to Freak Show a few years ago. And after Freak Show, we stopped at a convenience store before we got on the 40 to get something to drink. And we're getting something to drink. We're going to the register, and in walks Phil Ford. I was like, oh. And I always called him Coach because he deserved to be called that because he was a coach when I first started covering Carolina. So I always called him Coach, showed him that respect. And I introduced Gerard to him. Get in the car, Gerard's texting his dad. I just met Phil Ford. Gerard's 30. Gerard was born 13 years after Phil Ford last played at Carolina. And he was so thrilled to meet him, he texted his dad right away. Yeah. Phil Ford goes beyond the numbers. The numbers are ridiculous. Mm-hmm. The accolades are ridiculous. He didn't win a national title. 77 team should have won a title. Dean went to the Four Corners against Marquette. It was a mistake. Everybody makes mistakes. It happens. Even Dean made a few mistakes. and that team was ravaged by injuries. Lagarde broke a leg in February. He was out. They had 4 guys that were Olympians, 3 from the year before. 3 of them were on that team. Lagarde was one of them. He broke a leg. He was out in February. Walter Davis was banged up. We talked about him a couple of weeks ago. And Ford was banged up. And they still had the lead with 10 minutes left or whatever it was against Marquette in the national title game. So if they win that, maybe he's number 1. Who knows? Yeah. But Phil Ford speaks for itself. There was a bumper sticker Carolina had back then. And you could still probably find it right now. But, remember Ford Motor Company had a huge advertising campaign back then. And Carolina came out with some interesting stickers like, if God is not a Tar Heel, why is the sky Carolina blue, right? The other one was just powered by Ford.
Oh, that's good, yeah.
There was a bumper sticker on cars because Phil Ford was a dude.
That's good stuff. Yeah, I like that a lot. I ran into him. The first time I ever met him was actually about 10 to 12 years ago when he was an assistant coach for the Bobcats, I believe. And we used to go down there a lot with my family during Christmas break, and we would go to like a game every year. And
that's what I was covering.
Yeah, you probably were. And we went to eat after I think it was like an hour or 2 after the game, and Phil Ford sitting in the at a table just eating. After, and that was the first time I'd ever really seen him in person, and it obviously ran into. I think I've been in the elevator with him in the Smith Center a couple of times over the past few years as well. And yeah, man, he's a guy that when he walks around the building, Carolina fans.
Always so happy.
Yeah.
I know he wanted to be coach. I know he wanted to be head coach, and probably Dean Smith's favorite player. I probably shouldn't say probably. Phil Ford. Phil Ford is Phil Ford. And he's always so gracious. Such an unbelievably nice person. There's no reason for him to acknowledge and embrace everybody that wants to say something to him. And from my experiences, he does that. He's just an unbelievably decent person, a great ambassador for Carolina basketball. And it's when you learn about Dean Smith and what he was all about, it's a no-brainer when you connect Phil Ford to him and learn about Phil Ford, why that was such an amazing match.
Yeah, and probably, it's arguably the greatest Carolina basketball player to never win a national championship. You know what I mean? Just a guy that, if anybody deserved to win one for what he was able to do in his time at UNC, Phil Ford's probably at the top of that list. So
I agree with that.
Yeah, so big-time player, guy that everybody knows. Doesn't matter the age. If you're a Carolina basketball person or fan or guy, you know who Phil Ford is and you know what he accomplished. So, yeah, the final countdown is here, AJ. We're here for number 1 on this list. I'm sure a lot of people would probably know it by now from process of elimination more than anything, but Tyler Hansbrough, a Ford/center who played at Carolina from 2005 to 2009. Hold on tight, guys. This list is long. Consensus National Player of the Year in 2008, ACC Player of the Year that same year, 4-time first-team All-American, so he did it every year, 4-time first-team All-ACC, NCAA East Region MVP in 2008, as well as the ACC Tournament MVP in 2008, ACC Male Athlete of the Year in 2008, NCAA All-Regional Team in 2007, 2008, 2009, All-ACC Tournament First Team in 2007, 2008, 2009, Wooden Award finalist in 2007, ACC Rookie of the Year in 2006, First Team Freshman All-American, USBWA National Freshman of the Year in 2006, finalist for the Sullivan Award during his senior campaign in 2009, Patterson Medal winner in 2009, and his jersey number 50 is retired. I mean, Psycho T, to me, and I know people could say Phil Ford depending on the era, and some other some people might want to say MJ based on what he did. But if you're looking at solely Carolina careers, there's no doubt in my mind that Tyler Hansbrough is the greatest player of all time. I'll never forget, I believe it was during his freshman season. I know it was actually when they played Georgia Tech at home, and what was it, 40 points or something like that. And I know that time it was a record. I'll never forget being at that game. I remember exactly where I was sitting. I remember walking into the arena, and I just remember him just absolutely dominating the Yellow Jackets that night. And, we'd already knew how good he was, but that kind of resurfaced it. Okay, this guy's good, but he might be something special and something a little bit different. One of the greatest competitors, if not the greatest competitor to ever play at Carolina. One of the most unique personalities and individuals to ever play at Carolina from Poplar Bluff, Missouri. And just a guy that just did it all, not to mention undefeated against Duke in Cameron Indoor, which is a huge thing that Carolina fans like to remind Duke fans when it comes up. So when it comes to accomplishing just about everything that you can accomplish, and also, Carolina's all-time leading scorer, as a Tar Heel, Tyler Hansbrough did that. So for me, there's no arguments in him being number 1. I know people will disagree, but I mean, man, what more do you want from a guy?
The disagreement stuff makes it fun. First time I ever saw Hansbrough play was an exhibition game his freshman year. They may have been playing something like Winston-Salem State or something like that. I'm not sure. Don't hold me to that. Sometime maybe midway through the first half, Hansbrough comes out to deny – the ball's coming across the court. He comes out to deny a big or something like that, or flash. There was going to be a ball screen set. He blew up the ball screen before it was even set. And he goes out and gets a steal, gets a steal, pushes the ball ahead, catches up to it, couple dribbles, goes home, rams the thing home, and basically has that look of terror on his face. It's an exhibition game in like October.
That sums up Tyler Hansbrough right there.
That was it right there. I mean, that play essentially occurred in his mind every moment he was on the floor. It was all about destruction of the opponent. And some people say that he wasn't the most graceful player. Some people say he's the greatest bull in the china shop in ACC history. Look, the results are what matters. And actually, I thought he was very skilled, incredible hands, incredible balance to get the stuff off. He encouraged contact, played through contact better than anybody I've ever seen. I even covered a game in the NBA when he was with the Pacers. He didn't play like 20 minutes, 18 minutes. He went for 18 and 10, and he was doing the same thing there they did in college. And this is obviously not about the NBA, but it was really neat to see him just do what Tyler Hansbrough did. He didn't care what other people said. He didn't care that the critics were saying, well, you don't score this way or you don't score that way. What's the objective? The objective is to score more points than the other team. Yeah. And his Carolina clubs did that all the time, and he's the most prolific. He's not just the leading scorer in Carolina history, he's the leading scorer in ACC history. Broke that mark, I think, hitting a free throw against Radford in the NCAA tournament in 2009. He's also Carolina's all-time leading rebounder. I
know. What do you want?
And he's 2 straight Final Fours. Now he's
national champion.
North Carolina was 14-3 in the NCAA tournament when Tyler Hansbrough was there. North Carolina was 6-2 against Duke when Hansbrough was there, 4-0 at Duke. He averaged 20.2 points and 10.8 rebounds against Duke. All right? He all-time leading scorer, like I said, in ACC history. He's got almost 3,000 points, 2,872 points. I had to actually look that number up. I didn't remember that specific number. 53.6% from the field, scoring double figures in 133 of 142 games. We could sit here and just his was the longest bio because he's done the most.
Yeah.
And it does. And what's funny is I had someone, when I was talking about this list a couple of weeks ago, say, dude, he stayed 4 years. Of course he racked up those numbers. Guys are going to make the list now based on numbers or guys that can't get to the NBA. Tyler could have gone lottery pick his first year.
Oh, yeah.
He wanted to stay. He wanted to win a title. He flat out wanted to win a title. His celebration in 2009 in Detroit, and I remember I was on the front row, press row, probably in between the baseline and the free throw line on the right end of the court. Carolina's bench on the left. I was across from Michigan State's bench. When the last second clicked off, and he was the way he celebrated, that guy celebrated a lot. That guy wanted to beat you in everything, okay?
Competitive.
And that was a moment. I mean, he worked his rear off. He came back for that moment. And it was one of the coolest things I've ever seen as a sports journalist, watching him celebrate that moment. When he came up, when he gave Roy a hug around toward the end of the game, or right when that happened, which was an amazing embrace because, a lot of people want to win titles. And a lot of people are hell-bent on winning titles. But I don't know if I've ever covered a guy more so than Tyler Hansbrough. Just an incredible player. The free throw percentages, his ability to get other teams in trouble, to beat other teams, not just by scoring over them and grabbing missed shots and being aggressive defensively and just being a guy that got under their skin because he ticked them off all the time, right? But he got them in foul trouble. He put other big men on the bench, forced them to watch him play because he was constantly drawing fouls, and he'd go to the free throw line and he'd sink his free throws. The all-time, I think he's had the most made free throws in NCAA history.
Oh, he's automatic from the free throw line, yeah.
And that's the 2018 was probably the best team in the country. They didn't win it. And, the 2017 team's story is incredible because the redemption tour, because the way they lost in 16. And I'll never forget that locker room in 16 after the game. And then to juxtapose that to 17 was an amazing thing. But in 18, they're down 40-12 against Kansas. They were devastated. They made that comeback, and then Kansas kind of ran them out again. They had a redemption 2 or 2.
Mm-hmm.
And it was led by Hansbrough. He had one last shot to win it all. And he came back to do that, and they got it. And he actually wasn't the best player in 2009 in some respects. Ty Lawson sort of passed him by toward the end in a lot of ways. And Tyler was, fine. This is what makes us better. I want to win a title. How many other players with his accolades would have been okay with that? Yeah. Human nature says not many. And Tyler was okay with it, and he was still phenomenal anyway. So most decorated, most accomplished, most achievements. He got his banner. Jersey's up there in the rafters. His place in history is set. It's etched in stone. He did more playing basketball at North Carolina than anybody else has ever played.
Yep, absolutely. And then before we wrap this one up, I'll give you my favorite. This is my favorite personal Tyler Hansbrough story of all time. And if I can find the photo of it, I'll put it in this video here in a little bit. Yeah. But mine was actually funny enough. And I was in Wilmington. So I played soccer growing up. It was 2008. I believe it was a summer, kind of around the summertime of 2008 going into his, it was kind of the gap between his junior and senior season. We had a soccer tournament down there. I'm trying to think how old I was, probably 10 years old at the time, something like that, 10, 12 years old. And we're eating at this restaurant kind of right near Wrightsville, not across the bridge, but right across the bridge, like away from the water in Wrightsville. I can't remember what the restaurant is for the life of me. I don't even know if it's still there. But we're eating there, and I think we're eating outside, or maybe we had just pulled up. And we kind of looked to our left, and I got a few of my teammates with who were Carolina fans, and obviously everybody knew who Tyler Hansbrough was at the time. And I looked to my left, and I see Tyler Hansbrough riding down the road with, I don't remember if it was a girl, maybe his girlfriend at the time, or a guy. I don't know who it was. And he's riding a beach bike. You guys see how one of the greatest players in college basketball right now.
Wide handlebars?
Yeah, wide handlebars riding down the beach to the restaurant we were going to. So he pulls up the restaurant, and the photo I mentioned, I'm pretty sure it's on Facebook. I hope I can find it. And if I will, I'll throw it in right here. But we all of us got a little picture with Tyler Hansbrough. His face is funny in it too, because it's just classic Tyler Hansbrough face in the photo, like probably the last thing he wanted to be doing. But just one of the funniest stories I've ever seen with Tyler Hansbrough. You just look to your left and you see one of the top players in college basketball riding down on a beach bike, not a care in the world, man, acting like a regular dude. So that's my favorite Tyler Hansbrough story of all time. And he was nice enough to take a picture with us as well. And as a 10-year-old, 11-year-old kid, that was a pretty awesome moment, and one that me and some of my friends will never forget. But yeah, I had to throw that story in there because that's my favorite Tyler Hansbrough story of all time. It's just a classic one, to say the least. But good place to wrap this.
You think he was jumping off rooftops into baby pools that day?
That's a good point too, man. You talk about a guy.
Ping pong off the chest.
You talk about a guy that was right before social media. And man, I wish social media was a little bit more around then, because there would have been there is still some classic clips of Hansbrough out there. That,
lots of stories, lots of fun stories.
It's funny, and it's just some great videos out there. It's classic.
But I hope everybody enjoyed the series. A lot of our subscribers have. We run an article form, like a bio article form, and then we do this podcast once a week. And just keep in mind, guys, we're not making any proclamations here.
Nope.
If you have a totally different list, that's awesome. I would love to see it, and we have fun talking about it. My list isn't any more accurate or right than anybody else's list. It's just for fun. It's to go down memory lane. It kind of puts them in kind of in awe how many of these guys I actually covered or have interviewed. A couple of them I interviewed after they finished playing. I didn't cover them when they played. It's pretty neat for me to kind of think, wow, I really am pretty damn old, because I've been around a while talking to these guys. It's just a lot of fun. Carolina has such an incredible history. There's so many great players who achieved so much who didn't make the list. And it's no slight to them. You got to have, if you're doing 25, you got to put 25 there. You can't put 26 there. And I thought about maybe doing something, the next best group, but it'd be like 85 players.
Yes.
So there's no point in doing that. You guys let us know. You know how to reach me. You can find my email out there. You can DM me on Twitter. If you get through to me on Twitter, it's @Heel Illustrated. Mm-hmm. I'm on our account probably more than anybody else's. We have different people that are on it too that post stuff, but just reach out. Let me know what your list is. Love to see it. What guys would you have on your top 25 that we didn't have? If you have a different number one, tell me why. I want to know, because that's what makes it so fun. May and June, even though recruiting's on fire, not everybody is into recruiting as much as maybe we are and others. And this kind of helps fill a void and keeps things fun during these couple of months. So the football one, if you haven't seen that, you care about Carolina football, I'll scroll down. You can see our videos on that, or go to the site and read it because they've actually been free on the site as well. And same with the basketball one. Want to know what you guys think because I have a blast doing this. I know you've enjoyed it, Jacob.
Yeah.
Talked to you a lot about learning the history of the program in both sports, and I'm really enjoyed doing this with you and getting your take on learning about some of these guys because the history of Carolina basketball is fascinating and it is incredibly deep.
Yeah, it's about as deep as it gets. Yeah, I totally agree with that. I've really enjoyed I've learned so much from doing this. I hope, but I'm sure our listeners that have listened to these have learned a ton too. Cause between your stories and your insight and just, the accolades and everything that we've kind of brought to this, I mean, it's a really fun thing to do if you're into Carolina basketball, and we did one on football as well. So go check that out. And guys, like we've said in all the videos we've done, AJ talked about, getting involved and getting your opinion on this. If you're signed up to our website, tarleillustrated.com as a premium subscriber, you guys know we post all of our individual stuff in the premium message boards, and you go get involved in that message board once that gets posted, once this video's up. And we've had some really good discussions in there with people.
Fantastic.
Yeah, it's been really fun. So if you're signed up, which you can do for just $8.33 a month, go in there when you see this video up, you can find it in there. You'll see it probably at the top linked, and just go get involved in the chat and give us your opinion, and get involved with some of our subscribers and people as well. AJ's in there, Dina, everybody's in there as well. So it's just a fun and easy way to get your, one way you can reach out to us and kind of give your opinion on this list. And we're up for debate. We enjoy it. We welcome it. So bring all that in and let us know how you feel about this list, and specifically with this one, numbers 7 through 1 on it. But AJ, time to wrap this one up, man. That puts a nice little bow on our top 25 UNC basketball players of all time series. If you haven't seen the football one we did, go check that out. You can find that on our channel, and make sure you go check out the ones that we did previously, counting down to number 1. And there's about 4 videos in total on basketball. So definitely go check those out as well. I've been Jacob Turner. He's been Andrew Jones. You guys know the drill. Make sure you like, make sure you share, make sure you turn that notification bell on so you get notified every time we upload a video, and subscribe to our channel. We'll see you guys in the next one.
Thanks.
Thanks.